Asslamalaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Permissible Paths, where we are talking about permissible paths. I'm going to change it a bit. Usually I say permissible paths to entrepreneurship, but I feel like I realize with this episode, it's more permissible paths to wealth in general. Um, so, Assalamu alaikum, Imam. Can you tell me how to pronounce the last name? I don't want to
Sure.
mispronounce it.
No, it's fine. Facchine.
Fakini.
Yeah,
Okay.
like
Oh,
zucchini, but with an F.
yeah.
Facchine.
Okay.
Alaikum
Okay.
salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. I'm good. These are
Alhamdulillah.
busy days, but I'm doing well. How are yourself?
Alhamdulillah. I'm all right. I'm all right. So I want to get into a bit of your backstory. I know you studied at University of Medina, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But can you talk to us from before University of Medina and then kind of how you got there?
Sure. I mean, it's a long story. I
Yeah.
guess the Cliff's Notes version is that I accepted Islam when I was 21 years old during my bachelor's. So I have a bachelor's in political science. And that was my first actually stint up in New York. I was studying in Poughkeepsie, New York. And my final year, I was a senior. I accepted Islam, and I graduated in I think 2011. So after that, I was kind of interested in how to further my studies, how to
Mm.
understand Islam more, and I was kind of presented with two paths: one path to go sort of the Western University route, or the second path to try to do something a little more traditional. And so I held out. I for the traditional route. I worked various jobs in between 2011 and 2015, mostly in restaurants, on farms as well. And then during that time, I prepared my application for the Islamic University of Medina. Got a couple of recommendation letters from other imams, and then was accepted to go. And so I went in January 2015 and graduated from the College of Sharia in 2020, and then came back and landed in central New York. So that's the very, very, very brief version.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. How did you like financially survive through all of that then?
Well, that's a great sort of segue, I think, to the main purpose of your podcast. And whenever we talk about wealth, we're talking about risq,
Yeah.
right? And whenever we're talking about risq, we have to know that it's in the hands of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala,
Yeah.
and we always have to maintain that balance between taking the means, right, hustling, doing the things that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala would want us to do to make sure that we're upholding our end of the bargain. But then on the other side of relying on Allah Subhanahu wa Taala and trusting Him that He has a plan. So yeah, I mean, I come from a working class background. It's like it wasn't easy, and there was like a
Mm.
lot of times when my back was up against the wall. But I did what I had to do along the way, and that comes from subhanallah. When I look back on it now, yeah, it's like I worked those years in between before I got accepted. Like I was a waiter. I was a waiter in restaurants for probably 2 or 3 years, and it was cash. It was good money. I was a good waiter. I was good at what I did, but it wasn't an environment that was conducive to my religious growth,
Right.
right? And so I had some conflicts with some management and stuff like that, regarding sort of different things that religious accommodations and stuff like that,
Hmm.
and then just the whole atmosphere of restaurants and going out to eat and stuff like that, and the
Yeah.
nightlife. Like it wasn't very conducive to being a Muslim. And so at one point I just up and quit, and I didn't have another job lined up. So
SubhanAllah.
that was sort of this thing where it was like it was a test. I could have rationalized it to myself. I could have justified it to myself, but I decided to make a stand. And I remember sitting in the Masjid in southern New Jersey, and I didn't have a job. I was just like, just there studying, trying to learn Arabic, trying to, do Quran and stuff like that. And literally, somebody from the community comes up to me and says, "Hey, I heard you're looking for a job." So it was like Allah opens doors, right, when it comes
Alhamdulillah.
to your
Yeah.
your opportunities. Now it wasn't like the perfect job. That wasn't the start of a career or anything. Like I only worked that particular job for like maybe 6 months before
Okay.
leaving for another opportunity, but that's just a demonstration of what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala can do. So
Mm.
that actually, for my work history, so that was like I was working at a chemical import export company for like 6 months. I didn't really like it. It wasn't really my thing.
Mm.
Um, and I was married, still alhamdulillah. That was my wife.
Alhamdulillah.
We came into Islam together.
Oh
We were
wow.
both converts. Yeah. So we were married before I converted.
Mm-hmm.
I converted, and then few years later, she converted as well. So,
SubhanAllah.
alhamdulillah, Allah made
Alhamdulillah.
that easy for me and facilitated it.
Yeah.
So we were living with my parents in southern New Jersey, and I was doing the restaurant thing, and then I left it, and I was doing this sort of whatever, my first ever office job, I guess. But
Mm.
it wasn't working, and my wife was like, "All right, we've lived with your parents. I want to kind of have our own space." So we considered some things. We're going to move into Philly, or we're going to move out on our own, or whatever. And then I actually got an email from a contact from back in our college days, that such and such a person was opening up their own farm in central New York. And
Okay.
farming is something that both my wife and I had done on a volunteer basis during our time
Okay.
at school. And so the timing of it was weird. And we were just like, you know what? Maybe we should just try this opportunity. Bismillah.
Mm.
So we moved up to central New York. That was my first experience in central New York. We were living in Madison, New York, close to Utica. The
Mm.
masjid that I'm the imam at now is actually the closest masjid, like 20 minutes away. And I used to only have Fridays off, and I used to go on Jummah.
Wow.
Um, and it was physical labor. I mean, it was 10-hour days. It was,
Farm work.
yeah, farm work, exactly. It's like, people ask me like what I did, like what do you mean like you farmed? I mean, like I farmed. I mean, I was like, plowing the fields and planting things and doing things in the greenhouse from seed, and like from the minute you plant the seed to the minute that you sell it at market. I had a truck route for delivering stuff up into
Wow.
Syracuse and stuff like that. So I did it all. Um, and for very little money. I mean, obviously the pay wasn't good. We literally lived in the barn. There was like an apartment, like in the barn, and so that's
Okay.
where we were living at the time. And but alhamdulillah, I mean, it was growth, and Allah put blessing in it for us in other ways. I mean, we had a really positive experience with the Utica community and the Utica Muslim community that was actually going to leave a big impression for when I
Mm.
finished my studies and where to come back to.
Yeah.
And other things, like that's when I was learning Arabic, like sort of on my own. I had a little bit of help here and there, but every morning before going to the farm, I would do the Medina books. And then when I
Mm.
came home in the afternoon or the evening, I would be doing the Medina books and stuff like that. So Allah put a lot of blessing in that time. So all this
Mhm.
is to give, I know I'm kind of taking a tangent from your question,
It's
which
all
is
right.
kind of like how I supported myself when I was there. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to show, because when you go abroad, like people are in very different scenarios.
Yeah.
I didn't have like I knew students. And this is no knock on them, but it's just about the different realities. Like I knew students that like their parents were like paying for them, right? Once they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
over in Medina, or like they had an uncle or whatever, or even people who had family over there because, someone had a second cousin or whatever that lived in
Okay.
Medina. And so they crashed with them or whatever. Like my parents are always very supportive of me, alhamdulillah. But when it
Alhamdulillah.
comes to this, like I was kind of on my own,
Mm.
when it came to having to pay the bills, having to, put food on the table and stuff like that. And it wasn't like I was teaching English in Riyadh, right? Like some people do, and they, have a very lucrative sort of thing. It wasn't like that.
Mm.
It was very much precarious, right?
Okay.
So when I'm over there, as people know, if you go to the Islamic University of Medina, they give you a stipend, but the stipend hasn't changed since 1992 probably.
Mm.
And it's like I think it's like 100, no, it's 820 or 840 reals, which comes out to about $230
Okay.
a month. Which, if you're a single student living by yourself, living in the dorms, like subsidized meals, then that's great.
Mm.
But if you are a family man, you've got a wife and you've got kids, that's not going to cut it. So you have
No
to
good.
find out. Yeah, no way. Like, what are you going to
Mm.
do? So I basically patched things together between teaching English when I had to. I taught English
Mm.
privately as kind of like a tutor, and test prep and stuff like that. And then eventually, I got in with like Hajj and Umrah groups. So I was sort of like a group leader for Hajj and
Mhm.
Umrah, which is actually part of why that was one of the several reasons why I had to leave Medina when I did in 2020, because when the pandemic hit, that cut off all international travel, and that cut off
Yeah.
my means of income. And so, you know,
Okay.
when I left Medina for the US to return, we were literally looking at our bank account like it's July and we have enough money to survive here until August. Like,
Mm.
we better go. So that was kind of the scenario. And that was kind of the general scenario.
Now, was your wife here while you were in Medina, or did you both travel?
Yeah, we both ended up traveling, but things there aren't very straightforward all the time. So when I spent a year and a half there by myself,
Hmm.
because you have to go through a paperwork process, and the
Hmm.
process is always changing. So the rules are different now. But when I came in, you had to meet certain criteria. You had to put down a financial deposit actually to bring your family over.
Okay.
So when I first arrived, okay, I went to the place to try to figure out how to do that. And you go into the Arabic program, and then once you
Mm.
graduate the Arabic program, then you pick your 4 year kind of degree or your school. So it's my first semester. I kind of figure out how things are working. I go and figure out, okay, this is where I'm supposed to apply to bring my family over. They're like, well, the criteria is you have to have straight A's. So you can't do it your first semester. You have to wait a semester.
Oh,
And so, no problem. That was motivation. Alhamdulillah, got straight A's. Good. So the next
alhamdulillah.
semester, I go back and I was like, okay, now here's my straight A's. Like, let
Mm.
me bring my wife and my kid,
Yeah.
and they're like, sorry, it's closed this semester. We're not accepting it.
What?
And I was
Okay.
like, oh man, but that's sort of initiation into how things go over there, right? Rules change
Yeah.
all the time and very arbitrarily, and that's just what it is. So then finally, my third and final semester, I only did three. I tested out the first semester, alhamdulillah. I only did three
Mhm.
semesters in the Arabic program. And so my final semester still had straight A's, alhamdulillah, and they opened it back up. And so I was able to apply. There's a funny little story actually that goes along with the dramatic moment that I got accepted, because initially I wasn't accepted. I was rejected, and I
What?
was like really, really scandalized, right? Yeah. So the way they do it over there is like they just like post a paper on the wall of like all the names for the people who got accepted, and then another column of the people who got rejected. So when the
Ah,
rumor gets out that it's like the paper's up, and like all the guys with their families back home were crowding around the paper or whatever, and I'm looking and looking and looking, and I see my name on the paper that says like rejected, and I was like, how could this be? Like what did I do wrong? Like I thought I had all the conditions met. So I went in, and after these papers come out, you can imagine there's people who are upset. There's
yeah.
people who are very emotional. Some people come from like war torn countries and stuff like that. So it's like a really, really big deal.
Yeah.
Um, so emotions are running high. People are in the office. Some people raising their voice and stuff like that. And I'm just trying to navigate and see, okay, how can I try to get what I want out of the
Yeah.
situation? And I go to like the head honcho. His name was Faraj, as an older gentleman. And I said to him, waited in line patiently. And then when I got there, I said, like, excuse me, like, I'd like you to recheck, because it says here that I've been rejected, and uh, I should have been accepted. I had all the things. He's like, that's impossible. But I was just like, can you please look? And
Mm.
he took out his big like manila envelope of all the applications, and he whipped it out, and he rifled through it, and he found my file, my application. And he said something to me that I only heard a handful of times in my time in Saudi Arabia. He looked me in the eye and he said, I'm sorry, I made a mistake.
Wow.
And I was just like, if anybody who's been to the Islamic University of Medina or in that part of the world, that that's not typical behavior.
Mm.
And like, so I was very, very humbled by his humility. And he's like, we'll get back to you. Let me run it again and whatever. Alhamdulillah, at the end of the day, I was finally accepted, and I was able to bring my wife and my son over for the remainder of my time there, which is 4 years. So I did a year and a half by myself, and then I was able to do the entire time that I was in the kuliya, which is the 4 year aspect of the degree. I had my wife and my son there with me.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. So basically, you were persistent, because had you just seen that rejection
Right.
and just been like, it is what it is. I got to go.
True.
So,
Yeah.
in terms of the persistence, when you came back, how did you, like, did you go straight into being an imam? Because you said already you kind of knew where you wanted to go.
Yeah, so I mean, alhamdulillah, Allah opens doors, and that's the thing. To stress to people, it's like there were weeks where I couldn't afford to do my laundry. You know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
when I was before my wife and my son came, I used to wash my clothes in like the sink, like Will Smith. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
uh, whatever the movie that was. And then there were just some weeks when or some months when I was just short, and so like maybe I got my clothes like washed and pressed at the local like laundromat or whatever, but I had to leave it there for weeks because I didn't have the money to pick it up and pay them. Or my car broke down and I absolutely had nothing like to fix it with. Like these were regular occurrences, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept on opening doors. And so the big opening was starting to work for Hajj and Umrah companies. That was not just a steady stream of income, which was very important, but it was also a lot of networking and contacts. And so all of a sudden I'm giving tours of the Prophet's Masjid, and I'm taking people on Umrah, and I'm taking people on Hajj, people who are on boards in Masjid, right, in North America, and people who are kind of movers and shakers and things like that. And so by the time, alhamdulillah, I was junior, senior, I was starting to get interest. I was starting to get offers. By the way, and I always thank Allah, I have to give props to my bigger brothers and my older sort of classmates in Medina, the American students that looked out for me and helped me set me up with those opportunities. Without them, I wouldn't have had those opportunities. So by the time I was about to graduate, I had some offers. I had an offer in LA, I had an offer in Atlanta, one in Tennessee. But it was really my wife's idea. May Allah reward her, to be like, hey, like, why don't we reach out to communities to try to figure out this process sooner rather than later? Like we can, go back and like crash with your parents and whatever and figure out our lives, or we can start to maybe do the process now. And so I said, that's a really smart idea. And so I actually reached out to Utica Masjid, right, in Utica, New York, because of my fond memories of the area from before. And I knew some of the brothers and stuff like that. And it's just a real nice, interesting community, right? It's not too big. You can know everybody. It's multi-ethnic. They're, like very sort of, in a small community, people appreciate each other more, I think.
Right.
You don't feel like anonymous like you do in New York City or other places.
Yeah.
And so I reached out, I think on the Facebook page of the Masjid, and I sent I sent a message. I said, hey, my name is such and such, and I'm, such and such. And I was looking to see if you were, looking for an imam, or if, I could come and do, I think it was my junior year. So I had a summer where I would be back in the US. So I'm like, if you want me to come and do any sort of programs or anything like that, I can come up for the weekend and give a khutbah or a talk or whatever. And so the reply was like, literally yesterday, we formed a committee to search for an imam.
Wow.
So I was like, subhanAllah, like, look at the timing.
Yeah.
And then shortly after, like only a month or two after, the president of the masjid was going to come for Umrah, like already. And
Wow.
so when
SubhanAllah.
right, the timing, subhanAllah, like Allah has a plan. And so I went to his hotel. He was there with his wife and his kids and stuff like that. And I met the president, and we were very much on the same vibe. We were very much I got a good feeling about things. And so then I actually was able to go in the summer after my junior year and for a weekend, give a khutbah, give a couple talks and stuff like that. I met, some of the board of trustees and stuff like that. And they were ready to throw me a position like on the spot. And I was like, hold on. So actually that was Thursday night. So before I even gave the khutbah or any of the talks,
They were
they
ready.
were basically like dropping it in my lap. Yeah, exactly. And I was like, whoa, pump the brakes, guys. Like, you don't know me. It's like, let me show you what I can do first. And I still have a year left. And in my mind at that point, I was like, I want to do my master's. I want to stay here for longer. Like I was kind of just like making these sort of plans. But Allah is the best of planners. And so when it came to something that I thought that I was going to delay, which was coming to this community, as an imam, it actually ended up happening a lot quicker than I planned, because then the pandemic hit. So I had this relationship with this community, and then the pandemic hit. It didn't like cut short my senior year, but halfway through we went online. I mean, it was really heavy there in Medina. Like you couldn't leave your neighborhood for a few weeks. All international travel shut down. It was wild. And I received my diploma in a parking lot because I had my family. I lived off campus. I had to drive to campus. Campus was shut down. You couldn't get in and out. Like it was like a bubble. And so one of the administrators like meant be in the parking lot and like, handed me my diploma. And there was no ceremony. Usually they give you like the black bisht. I didn't get any of that because everything was shut down.
Yeah.
And then so initially the plan was, as I said, to kind of come back and initially the plan was to stay there for longer and to do these sorts of things, and it hastened my exit. A
Mhm.
couple other factors went into that too, but definitely the financial aspect and sort of everything shutting down. Whereas before I was planning on staying for maybe a couple more years, now it was like, yeah, like I said, it's like we can't afford to be here past July, so we better get on one of these evacuation flights and get back to the U.S.
Mm.
And so we did. That was insane. I was given anybody who's familiar with the kingdom, you have what's called khuruj nihai, which is like your final exit visa. So you need a visa to get in and a visa to leave. Um,
Wow.
oh, it's wild. It's wild. And so I got my exit visa on Thursday, and my flight was before Fajr on Sunday. So I had that window of time. What's that, like, less than 2.5 days to get rid of all my possessions, to get my
SubhanAllah.
car out of my name, to, like, it was insane. In fact, I mentioned a deposit earlier. They made you at that point deposit 20,000 Saudi riyals as a deposit with them
Mm.
in order to bring your family over.
Mhm.
And I didn't even have the opportunity to take that money out. I'm hoping it's still in a bank account over there. I have not been back since I left. Um, but yeah, so those are the circumstances we left under. And
Mm.
because of kind of the relationship that we had developed with the Utica Masjid, we were able to come right away. What do you call it? What's the word for it? When you come into the country and you have to isolate, is that what they used to call it?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
quarantine. That's what I'm looking for. We
Yeah.
quarantined in our current home, which is, like where it is, like close to the masjid. And we quarantined there. And then I gave the Eid khutbah after a negative, a negative PCR test or whatever.
Mm.
And then we started up. So it was very much hit the ground running, like land and start sort of thing.
Mm. Now, does being an imam support you fully, or do you kind of have your hands in other stuff as well?
I do have my hands in other things, and that's always kind of the nature of how I've been about my life. I've always tried to leave options and doors and opportunities open, to
Mm.
grow. And that, there's two extremes and there's two schools of thought on that. I remember one of my first teachers, Imam John Starling, down in South Jersey, Hafidhullah, when he used to tell me, if you're going to do something, do it full speed and run at it full speed and really focus on it, so that
Mm.
you're mastering it, you're doing the best that you can at it. But there is also something to be said for leaving yourselves options to do other sorts of things.
Mm.
There's also a problem, when it comes to just the institution of the masjid in general in North America, where most masajid are not set up for financial success,
Right.
or financial sustainability, let's say.
Yeah.
And so what they're able to offer their imams is not what it should be. I mean, to be frank, and that's not throwing shade at this particular community that I love. It's just a larger, systemic problem. Everybody, it's data driven. The Muslims are behind Jews and Christians when it comes to compensating their religious leaders, and that's just a fact.
Mm.
And there's other sorts of reasons why that exists when it comes to institutional know-how. Longevity is part of it, right? Like all these sorts of management, whatever. We can talk about it, but it is just a fact. So the fact that reality mixed with the reality of sort of it being pandemic, and I'm not really able to do a whole lot in the masjid. Everything I'm doing is kind of remote, and everything's kind of chaotic. Then it did force me to kind of look to sort of other opportunities. So one of those opportunities was teaching tafsir online. There's actually a full-time Islamic high school. It's called Legacy. They run 6th through 12th grades. And I was very skeptical about online learning at first, but the more and more I experienced it and worked with the organization, I was very, very impressed
Mm.
with how organized they were and their whole sort of mission. So they're trying to Islamicize education in general, right? Instead of what
That's
most
a
even
word.
Islamic, yeah, Islamicize, right? Like, most even Islamic schools, what they'll do is that, well, you're going to study math and science and, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. And then Islamic studies is kind of what they call like a waste bin category, right? It's like we're just going to tuck
Mm.
it in like as an afterthought.
2%. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and even that, like I recently, actually last year at the Mass in Baltimore, I made a presentation and I pulled a screenshot from one of the schedules of one, like a big Islamic school based in Chicago. And they actually had that set up, and Islamic studies as a subject alternated every other day with gym class.
What?
So they weren't even given Islamic studies, which is already a waste bin category. We're talking about like your fiqh and your tafsir and your whatever is all in Islamic studies, right?
Yeah.
And then even then, it's switching off every day with gym class, right? So
Yeah.
that's a problem. And so the part of the mission and philosophy of this school is that we're going to put things the other way. We're going to Islamicize math. We're going to Islamicize science. We're going to Islamicize social studies. And so there's greater integration in every single thing that you're going to be doing. You're going to be also learning about Islam, like while you're doing it.
Wow.
So
SubhanAllah.
it's a mission I believe in, and I'm very impressed with Mr. Zahir Arastu, who's the headmaster of the school, and the whole sort of professional crew, or the crew of professionals that man the school. Very, very impressive. I think
That's an
it's
online school?
yes, it is. It's full online, which is why it's kind of a solution for people who live in places that might not have a
Yeah.
full time brick and mortar Islamic school. They started in 2018. I talk about timing, right? Because then
Mm.
the pandemic hit, and it became really, really important to think about online education. So I've been teaching tafsir for them. Basically, grades 6, 7, and 8. The way the curriculum works is that we break the Quran into thirds. And so I cover a third of the Quran every year: sixth grade,
Okay.
seventh grade, eighth grade. And so I make my own curriculum, and that's been very rewarding. And that has been one of my side projects, or streams of income. I also got involved with one of the local liberal arts colleges. You probably know Hamilton College down in Clinton. So I
Mm.
do some part-time chaplaincy work there, um, just really to have a role in the MSA and to have a role in that sort of environment. My first
Mm.
education, my first, in Poughkeepsie, was a liberal arts college. So I sympathize for those kids. I sympathize for the college-age kids that, are kind of being pulled apart by various sort of ideologies, and people
Yeah.
trying to steer them in certain ways, right?
Mm.
So I throw in a couple hours there, and then more recently I've started getting involved in the Yaqeen Institute, and when it comes to research and things like that. And that's something that I'm hoping to scale up soon when it comes to my involvement. So that's pretty much everything I've got going
Yeah.
on.
Okay. Now you mentioned chaplaincy. I'm
Yeah.
probably pronouncing it wrong. Can you
Nope.
explain a bit what that is?
Definitely. So chaplaincy is the idea that you're kind of like, it's what they call pastoral care. So if you think pastoral, you think of like sheep and animals and things like that. You think about
Mm.
the role of a shepherd. Okay.
Okay.
It's like you have to basically shepherd these people. You have to take care of their emotional needs, and you have to kind of guide them. So as opposed to, being an imam has certain pastoral elements to it. When somebody comes into your office and they're going through a crisis in their life, or a
Mm.
crisis of faith, or a crisis in their marriage, or whatever, you're serving in a pastoral role, or you're doing sort of chaplaincy work. But other things that you do as an imam are not anything like chaplaincy, like when you're teaching Quran, or you're teaching tafsir, you're like running these sorts of things.
Mm.
So chaplaincy work usually has to do with that emotional spiritual support. So
Mm.
chaplains exist in prisons, chaplains exist in hospitals, in universities, and different sorts of spaces like that. So that's kind of that work. When I'm there with the students at Hamilton, I have to be there for anything that could arise, like within their own sort of personal progression and growth. And so to be kind of a sympathetic ear, and also sort of like a mentor and an older brother figure to kind of give them advice.
Okay. Okay. I want to bring it back a little bit. When you talked about the masjid and it basically not having enough to, a lot of masjids not having enough to support itself, let alone then bring on full-time imams or workers in the masjid.
Mhm.
I've been recently seeing this a lot, and it's a program. One second. There we go. Uh, and this is your masjid website, right?
Yes.
And it's like membership fees.
Yes.
So I don't know if like you came up with that, or if they've been came up with that. Can you talk a little bit about the membership fees and how that works and the benefits of it?
Definitely. So membership is one model to try to make masajid and houses of worship sustainable. The idea is that if you pay a regular fee as opposed to just passing around the hat, right,
Mhm.
and relying
Mhm.
on donations, then an institution is going to be able to predict what's coming in and what's coming out, and you're supposed to anticipate more involvement from the people who are paying, right? It's like just like the difference between if you charge money for a class or not. If I do a class on tafsir or whatever, Quran, and I don't charge any money, that's good and that has certain advantages. But one of the disadvantages of it is that some people might skip it whenever they feel like it,
Yep.
right? Versus
Creative
if
day.
you if you charge just a nominal fee or something like that, whatever you're going to do, a lot of people feel more invested, they have more stake in it, and so
Right.
they're probably going to show up more regularly, which is why parents pull their kids out of Sunday school to go to things like karate and soccer and football and stuff like that, because they
Right.
pay more money for those programs, right? In
Right.
general. So if the two conflict, which one is going to get priority? Usually the one that gets paid more money to. So that's the idea behind membership. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. The idea is that you're going to get people that are donating, they're formalizing their donation, right?
Mhm.
And so, that money that you probably just already put into the pot during Ramadan or whatever, well, let's just formalize that. Let's say, hey, I'm going to commit to a certain amount of dollars every year.
Mhm.
That way, the masjid knows it's coming in; they can plan on it. And there's usually other sorts of rights that are associated with a membership. So again, there's lots of different ways to do it. Most institutions have different tiers, right? So there's like different sort of tiers of membership, and the more that you pay, the more sort of perks that you get. So some of those basic perks that probably almost all members enjoy are like voting rights, right?
Mm.
So if you have the officers of the masjid, the president, the secretary, and the treasurer, if they are elected officials, then being a member usually entitles you to being able to vote. If you give more and you have a higher tier membership, then maybe it gives you other sorts of perks. Sometimes the masjid will attempt to buy grave plots, right,
Mm.
at a cemetery, and
Yeah.
they'll try to buy them all in one big block to get a discount. Okay.
Yeah.
So then they can offer that discounted price to their members if you're at a certain tier of the membership, or things like that. It could be access to to discounts on programs. Like if we charge for Sunday school, for example, if you're a member, maybe you get a discount like for
Mm.
that particular fee. So that's the general idea behind membership, and it's just one of the sorts of ways to try to make any sort of institution more sustainable.
Okay. I feel like that's a good way to lead into how do you then balance like deen and dunya and not feeling like I'm compromising one for the other?
Yeah, that's a big question, and that's really hard. I think there's a couple answers, depending on if you look at it from like the individual perspective or like an institution.
Mhm.
So when it comes to being an individual, how do I balance between my deen and dunya? You have to make sure that your dunya is working for your deen and not the other way around, right?
Mhm.
And that's so relevant, particularly to imams, because if you can slip into the opposite, right? You can slip into the opposite where even the things that you're doing for the deen, they're really just about making money, or they're really just about, whatever. But if you try to, if you try to, with your intention, convert the things that you're doing for money into a greater purpose, right? Pleasing Allah
Mhm.
subhanahu wa ta'ala, being, having some sort of honor and standing within the community, right? We need leaders. We need leaders in every community, men and women. And so and it's sad to say, but it's just the reality that people respect money. Money talks, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a certain status and a certain clout in the community, you're able to steer things in a way that you aren't going to be able to if you don't have that.
Mhm.
So if you have a job that's permissible and you're trying to, and your intention by it is that, listen, well, let's play two scenarios. It's like if I have the intention, well, I just want to be a big shot and I want a lot of Instagram followers, then
Mhm.
that's obviously not an appropriate intention. But if
Mhm.
my intention is like, listen, I want to make moves in my community, I have ideas, and I think that we can be doing better than what we're currently doing. And in order to reach that and have that influence, I need to have this sort of status or this sort of whatever. Then that's a good intention, right?
Yeah.
And so these are things that even the companions had to deal with, right? A lot of times people think that the companions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam were
Awesome.
just like chilling with him 24/7. That's not true. That's not true. Omar radiallahu anhu and the other companions, they used to alternate every other day, right? They would like pair up with somebody else in like a buddy system,
Mm.
and they would hustle and work one day, and the other guy, their buddy, would be hanging with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then they'd kind of like
Mhm.
exchange notes, and then they'd flip it and do the opposite the next day.
Mm.
So there's no inherent contradiction. You have to take care of your worldly responsibilities, but if you're able to convert your intention into something that everything you're doing for your dunya is also contributing to your deen, then
Mm.
this is the way. Then you're going to be able, you basically get to the point where everything you're doing is for your deen.
Yeah. Yeah. Inshallah. So you mentioned a part of the person who wants to grow Instagram followers and wants to become this big shot, one for the sake of just, being big, and then correcting their intentions and trying to do it to please Allah.
Mhm.
I hear often, there are a lot of wealthy Muslims and there are a lot of Muslims who they make so much money, but they fear showing off or they fear evil eye. And so they don't go teaching other Muslims how to also do that.
Mm,
And they don't go sharing that knowledge with anyone else.
mm.
Um, what is your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I mean, there's definitely two things going on, I think. So one is like ostentation, like the flashy display of wealth, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's helping others to get wealth. And those are
Mm-hmm.
two completely different things. It's like to teach somebody else how to get wealth is not showing off, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're just trying to lift everybody up. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And so that's a huge community service. If we have people that are entrepreneurs in the community that are, quote unquote self-made, obviously Allah is in control of everything, but
Right.
in the sense that, they hustled and they took, opportunities and they made certain decisions, they have certain principles that other people can benefit from, then it actually becomes a duty, right? To lift
Mm-hmm.
up people around you and to share the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
That's different than me sporting like a, 100K dollar watch and rolling up in a Lambo or whatever, just showing off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the big sort of that's the balance and the kind of slippery slope that social media influencers kind of fall into, because sometimes you can justify being flashy
Yeah.
by saying that, well, I'm just trying to have more reach,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you better be darn sure that
Mm-hmm.
your intentions are pure, like when you do that sort of thing. Because but I don't buy it really, because if you look at some of the biggest influences, we're talking about athletes, like we're talking about like Habib, right? Like the
Yeah.
UFC wrestler, we talking about Muhammad Salah, like
Mm-hmm.
Sadio Mane, right? Those guys aren't flashy with their wealth,
Mm-hmm.
but they're at the top of what they do, and they're visibly Muslim, and they have an enormous impact on other people. Um, and that has its own responsibility, but it's like it doesn't come from them being flashy with their wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually, how many times does it happen that the person who has something to prove, they're the person who's showing off, and the person who is secure and actually like the really wealthy guy, they're kind of like almost living, I don't say living below their means, but it's like they're less flashy, they're more muted, right?
Yeah.
Because they're secure in it, they don't have to prove anything to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the social media game, that's something you have to be really, really kind of like just aware of.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of difficult, like you said. It's a slippery slope because money does talk, and so if you're trying to teach people, they might not listen when you're just talking in front of them. Versus if you got a whole bunch of fancy cars and luxury styles,
Yeah.
then they might pay attention just a little bit more.
Yeah, it's
So
true. And sometimes you might need to flex on somebody,
yeah,
like that might happen like on a case by case basis. But there's a
mm,
difference between flexing on somebody as an individual to be like, yo, you should take me seriously, as then that's like your default mode. It's like, that's what I'm doing all the time, everywhere, for everybody.
right.
I was even told that as a young imam and as a student of knowledge, it's like some of my mentors told me, it's like, listen, there's going to be times where you got to flex on
Mm,
people in the masjid because they think they know something,
yeah.
and when I heard that, I'm like, oh, come on, no one's like that or whatever. They'll just respect the degree, but it's not true. And like people
Mm,
think they know. And so
mm,
sometimes you got to put somebody in your place. Now that doesn't mean that I go around just name dropping and like constantly showing off like my knowledge, right? Like
mm,
I can have that kind of subdued attitude towards it and sort of, move in silence or whatever. But then if somebody is going to kind of not get the memo, then you might have to flex on somebody on a case by case basis.
right, right. So I like to talk about the content creation that you do because that's where I originally found you on Instagram,
Okay.
Reels. Uh, you have a very how do I say, professional setup. That's the word. That's the word that I want to use. Do you have like a whole team? What made you get into the content creation space? Like
Yeah.
how'd you get into that?
That's a good question. So I mean, it's all my bro Sifat. We've got a team of one, and my
Hmm.
bro Sifat, he handles it all, and that's just his gift from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, that he's just got that artistic eye and that creativity, and that's his passion, and he's really, I think, a great example of how to use the blessings of Allah in a way that pleases Allah, right?
Mm,
Because he could have been making ads and videos for big corporations and companies or stuff like that and selling his soul, so to speak, right?
uh,
And instead, he wants to put it in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah just kind of brought us together in that sort of way. So it was very much, the other thing I would add to that is that when I first came to Utica, like I was very critical of like the social media game, and I never considered sort of like myself as like an influencer or getting involved in stuff. I still don't think of myself as an influencer, to be honest. But I've been humbled, I will say, by Allah's plan, in that it has had more benefits than I thought.
mhm,
It's almost like, I give the basketball analogy to anybody who's familiar with basketball. It's like sometimes your post game sets up your outside game, and then sometimes it's the reverse, right?
mm,
When I came to Utica, I thought, I'm just going to do everything in the Masjid, and I'm just going to focus on real face-to-face relationships, and it's just going to be really organic like that. Well, then there's the pandemic, and there's the shutdowns and all this other stuff, and Allah's kind of showing me, I think, that okay, you don't have to be so categorically dismissive. Like, it can be good if you make it good. And
yeah.
so the the whole content creation, the social media and stuff like that has been something that was completely unexpected and off my radar.
Mhm,
And maybe that's why we've had a degree of success, because I honestly don't care about followers, and I don't care about making people happy. It's not like where I derive my sense of self-worth or my value from. I really enjoy like engaging in ideas and trying to take really, really complex ideas and make them simple so that anybody can understand it.
mm,
And I think that we're just like filling in gaps when it comes to communicating Islam and presenting it, almost like translating the concepts of Islam into like the native tongue,
okay.
like a real like indigenous sort of like American vernacular, right?
Yeah.
And nobody panic. That doesn't mean like American Islam, like some people think. That means like translating the ideas so that they hit right, right? So that you're
Mm,
trying to be heard in the right way, which is a completely different thing from just like giving the message or spitting the dawah or whatever. You have to make sure that you're being heard in the right way. And so that's a passion of mine, and my bro Sifat has his passion, and it all just kind of linked up in
flowed.
a good way.
Yeah. Okay. Is that the ultimate goal with the content creation? Just to basically break down Islam to people?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's dawah. We want to reach people who are Muslims who have doubts, and non-Muslims who might think they know something about Islam, or non-Muslims who acknowledge that they don't know anything about Islam.
Mm,
I believe that Islam is got the most potential to redeem America and
mm,
North America. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not looking for, I'm not trying to make Islam fit into your boxes, right?
yeah.
I'm trying to challenge your boxes. I'm trying
Mm,
to show people how Islam is the answer. And so that is a process of translation, the translation of concepts, not just the translation of words, and trying to give people a way to understand it in maybe a way that they haven't considered before. So yeah, I'd say that's the main project.
okay. Okay. Alhamdulillah. May Allah make it a success for you
I mean,
and your team or your partner.
yeah.
um, I'd like to speak a little bit on free mixing
Okay.
because I recently seen, I didn't watch the video, but it was a couple of brothers and sisters sitting down and they were talking about some topic that they feel was really important to share with the ummah. And when it comes to business, even, or being an influencer and trying to really spread the message of Islam, sometimes the line in free mixing can be drawn or you don't know where it is. So you just go, never mind, even though it is something beneficial.
Hmm.
So I'd like to know your thoughts on that and how can you tell like, okay, this is over the line?
Fantastic. There's a great book. I was actually reading it this morning, by Dr. Hatem al-Hajj. Some people are probably familiar with him, on this very issue. I forget exactly the title of it at this moment, but it goes into all these issues. And, for anybody who studied fiqh, they know that the whole idea of free mixing, of ikhtilat, is something that it's ambiguous. in the sense
Mm.
that it's hard to draw very clear black and white lines. There are
Mm.
some things that are unequivocally and completely haram, right? Like seclusion, right? Khalwa, right? It's like some two people being alone in the same room
Mhm.
together, like so nobody else can see, nobody else can hear. That's obvious. That's consensus. But then everything else that's less than that, it has to do with a lot of factors that go into it. What's the purpose? What's the nature? What are the ages, involved? What are there's just a lot of other factors. So Dr. Hatem al-Hajj, he has a nice breakdown of this in his book. And I think like one of the main points of it is, yes, it is important to be able to do da'wah and to participate in business and things like that, but it has to be principled and it has to follow certain rules and etiquettes, right?
Mm.
And so, for example, one time I did, the podcast with Yaqeen Institute, and somebody's in the comments blasted me because he's like, oh, you're just like looking at each other's auras. They don't know that I'm looking at a camera. I'm not looking at you right now. That's
Yeah.
right. I've got a camera set up and then I got the computer over here. So I'm not actually even looking at you. I'm looking at
Mm.
the camera. So that's one such sort of safeguard that people can put when it comes to trying to minimize or trying to mitigate, right? They're trying to deal with the possible sort of chinks in the armor, the things that could happen in a very similar way that they could possibly happen when you go to the grocery store, right? Or you go to like university or things like that. And
Mm.
that's why people need to pump the brakes when they're thinking about like very, very black and white. Absolutely not, can't, because it's like, do you go to the grocery store? It's like,
Mm.
do you stand in line behind someone of the opposite sex? Right?
Mm.
It's like, yes, you do. Is that ikhtilat? Is that free mixing? It's like,
Mm.
so we have to work on both ends. We have to be realistic in one sense, but we also have to be cautious.
Yeah.
But we can't fall off on either side of too much permissibility or too much caution. Um, and so, there's 3 P's that people talk about when it comes to this issue that I find very helpful. That everything should be public,
Mm.
purposeful, and professional. And I
Mhm.
think those are 3 golden rules when it comes to interacting with the opposite sex. Is that, purposeful, meaning that we're sticking on topic. Right now, we have a podcast that we're doing. We're talking about the podcast. If you send me an email or whatever, it is something that's related to the podcast. We're not, chit chatting. We're not small talking, like how's your family, like whatever. No, it's purpose driven. The second is that it's public right now. This forum, everybody's going to see it. It's recorded, like whatever.
Mhm.
You send me an email. Maybe I've got somebody else on my email address. That
Mhm.
way, it's a public thing. There's no feeling like we're doing anything like super private, right?
Mm.
And then so public, personal, and professional. Yeah, professional, which goes into purpose driven as well. Is that like I might just because a podcast is a conversational sort of format. It's like it doesn't mean that I'm going to step over the line and be unprofessional, right? I'm not
Yeah.
going to make any sort of lewd jokes or talk about or make any sort of insinuations or
Mm.
make passes at somebody or something like that. Like that's the result.
Divert from the topic.
Yeah, exactly. Divert from the topic. Exactly. It's like it's got to be
Mm.
professional. And so I think that when it comes to dawah, whether it's in person in the masjids or when it comes to these sorts of things that are remote, that are online or whatever, that if
Mm.
people stick to the 3 Ps and that should cover the majority of cases and everything will be okay, inshallah.
Inshallah. So when it comes to, let's say, a business owner, would you advise maybe if he's a man, he hires mostly men. If she's a woman, she hires mostly women, and they kind of try their best to stick to that, or whoever has the best skills, basically.
I mean, it depends. Like, so if somebody is going to be like your secretary and be intimately involved in your life, right? There's a
Mhm.
reason why there's like a stereotype of like bosses cheating with their secretaries or whatever, because
Mhm.
that's an avenue where that relationship, it's really blurs the lines between what's personal and what's professional. Okay,
Mhm.
somebody's handling your whole schedule and they're like, like whatever. So you just have to ask yourself, in what ways am I interfacing with this person? Okay. I don't think it has to go to the point that men should only hire men and women should only hire women. I think that there are other safeguards that we could put up that would take care of issues that don't go to that extent. If I have a project manager, for example, or if I'm trying to, someone's working on marketing, for example, okay, I can hire a female if she's the most qualified person for the job. but I have to be very cognizant of those 3 P's in the way that I interface with that person and the way that we're going to touch base when it comes to like the projects and whatever report back she needs to do, and this and that and the third. If I need to bring in another person, or CC somebody on an email or whatever, then I am doing that as precautionary measures. But I think that sort of thing can be, I think it can happen without necessarily us having to fall into like all female and all male businesses.
Right, right. So I'd like for you to give some type of, I'm trying to find the best words to use for it.
Mhm.
Basically, uh, some type of Quranic or maybe even hadiths about making money and seeking wealth, because sometimes as Muslims we have the feeling of money is the root of all evil, or
Right,
like
right.
to try to become an entrepreneur or a business person, like that's it, you're over, and you probably are a bad Muslim. So
Right, right, right.
can you
Well, I
pull
mean,
some
the
evidence?
example of the companions, I mean, well, okay, if you're going to go to the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Baqarah that riba is made haram and trade is made halal, right? He
Mm,
contrasts those two things.
mm,
So, I mean, that's exactly the key distinction, is that this thing is open. It's open season. That's the default ruling on the thing. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he
so,
criticized, or he maybe not criticized, but he stopped when it came to inheritance or wasiya, when he was giving like a bequest. One of the companions was about to give a bequest. He told him, don't leave it's better that you leave your descendants with sufficient wealth than you leave them poor,
mm,
right? And so that's what we call in fiqh circles illah, right? That's like the reason behind the sort of ruling. And so anything that takes that ruling takes the same sort of logic. It's like you shouldn't leave your descendants poor. And then if we look at the example of the Salaf and the companions, obviously we see that we have the stories of the Muhajirun from Mecca coming to Medina, and then the Ansar from Medina saying, well, I can give you this, I can give you that. And then the Muhajir from Mecca saying, just show me where the souk is, just show me to the market, and then
mm,
buying and trading and doing what they have to do in order to develop themselves and build their wealth back again. So there's plenty in the Quran and Sunnah, and in the way that the Sahaba understood the Quran and Sunnah, to show us that wealth is not evil inherently at all, and that
mm,
it really just has to do with what you do with it.
mm. What you do with an intentions,
Yes.
correct? Yeah, yeah. So I think I'd say that's about all. I would like for you to leave a little bit of a last minute word to somebody who is trying to seek wealth with the intention of pleasing Allah, but may feel like they don't know how to balance that, or it's a bad idea even to
Mm.
try to be self sustainable that way.
Definitely. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ said, "In Allah kataba al-ihsana ala kulli shay." He said that Allah has prescribed or decreed excellence in everything. That means
Mm,
that if you're going to put your time into something, do it well, do it the best that you can possibly do it, and that everybody understands the level of that. That means like your proficiency at the thing, right? Like if you're going to make money, make it well. But it also is tied to the religiosity aspect of it too, and your intention, right? To do it
mm,
well means that you're doing it with the right intentions, you're doing it respectfully, professionally, you're doing it in the best manner that you possibly can. And sometimes doing it the best means also having it at the right emphasis in your life. It's not going to consume your life and kill your relationships, right? But it's also not going to be neglected so that it's not done right in the first place. So Allah decreed excellence in all things, and if you're making money, then that's something that you should be excellent at. You should be someone who seeks to perfect it in the most broad and holistic understanding of what it means to perfect something.
mm. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for coming on.
I
Very
mean,
appreciate it. I hope those who are listening can pull some type of benefits from it. Um, and we'll end it there, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.